All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Cary Brown. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Commission on Women. I am a 54-year-old white woman with medium-length brown hair, and I'm wearing a bluish purplish sweater over a white shirt. And I am so pleased to be here today to talk about Equal Pay Day for women with disabilities. Now, Equal Pay Day is a symbolic day that's chosen every year to symbolize the day in the year to which women need to work to make as much money as men made in the whole year before. And so when we look at all women and we average out all the earnings of women, that day usually falls around the end of March or the beginning of April. And so that's an interesting figure for us to look at, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Within that vast population of women, there are a lot of other stories to tell. And so this year, the Vermont Commission on Women is taking some time to look at what does that mean for Black women, for instance? What does it mean for Latina women? What does it mean for women with disabilities? And so today, I'm very pleased that we've got a fantastic panel of people who are here to speak about their experiences, their expertise, their knowledge, their opinions, and just to have a fabulous conversation about this. Leading a conversation today is Sarah Launderville. She is the Executive Director of the Vermont Center for Independent Living, and I'm so pleased that you have joined us today and put together this fantastic panel. Thank you, Sarah, and take it away.
Thanks so much, Cary. And thanks for the Vermont Commission on Women for putting together all of these really important dialogues. It's my absolute pleasure to be with you speaking along with this great panel. And I'm going to turn it over first and tell you first, my name is Sarah Launderville. I'm a white woman. I have medium brown length hair, wearing a black shirt in front of a nicely lit candle in my background. I'm going to go around and have folks just introduce themselves, and we'll start with Deborah Lisi-Baker.
I'm Deborah Lisi-Baker. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a white woman with dark hair, but with significant gray hair. And I'm wearing a dark blue turtleneck, and though you can't see it, I do use a wheelchair.
Okay. Cara Sachs.
So I'm Cara Sachs. I am a white woman with short, dark hair. There is a little bit of white in there, but you can't see it. With glasses and a dark purple polo shirt, sitting on a sofa, and you might, my service dog in training might pop her head in here every once in a while. And I am a part-time wheelchair user also.
Thanks, Cara. Winnie Looby.
Hi, I'm Winnie Looby. A description, I have brown skin, glasses, long graying hair also, and I'm wearing a white shirt, and I'm sitting in front of a pink background, and I'm also a part-time wheelchair user.
Thank you. And Laura Siegel.
Hello, my name is Laura Siegel. I am a white female, mid-30s, with long brown hair, wearing dangling earrings, hearing aids. I am deaf.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here today and be willing to share your experiences with being deaf or having a disability, and how you see sort of the world around Equal Pay Day, but also employment and disability. So this topic is really important to me personally and professionally, as a woman who has a psychiatric disability, who lived on Social Security benefits before returning to an accessible work environment that allowed me to thrive, earn a living. But I went through that system that puts up barriers and was discriminatory. And what I learned over time, that my experience is not unique, as many people with disabilities go through, even today, similar experiences. Ultimately, though, with reasonable accommodations and supports, I was able to have incredibly life-changing experience around being employed. So I want to start this conversation with sort of that wonderful benefit about why employment is so important. So I'm going to ask all of our panelists to tell us a little about why you find employment important, or if you do, I suppose. So Deborah, why don't you start us off?
Well, I come from a family where I'm just my parents worked really, really hard. And when I was a teenager, I already had part-time jobs, babysitting and doing, I actually had a summer program position working in a Head Start program. And so for me, by the time I finished college, I had a very young child, and it was very important for me to work to have enough money to raise my child. So that's, and fortunately, I've been able to be, at least part of my jobs have been relating to social justice and disability. So that's quite a gift to be able to earn a living and do social justice work. So,
thank you. Laura, how about you?
Just waiting on the interpreter. So this is Laura. So I had a ultrasound tech position. I also have an MBA in mental health management, business management, and that helped advance my business field, my business major. But I decided to give up my license for that. That was the end of December. There was no point in me maintaining that license. So I haven't used that license, that ultrasound technician license, for many years. And many people were concerned within the work field and employment field about my hearing. They weren't sure what I could do. So I had to empower myself to find different jobs. Now, in the past, I would look for jobs working in hearing environments instead of only working with the deaf community. Instead of pigeonhole me, hold on one second, just for the interpreter. So there's one community that I worked with. I'm not complaining about, that was my original game plan, working there, working more within the hearing community, but now I changed that plan.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. Winnie, how about you? What do you find important about employment?
I think for me, what's important is that I get to do something that I like, not just that I'm functional at, but that I actually enjoy. That's a huge thing. I was able to go back to school when I became disabled. I wasn't born disabled. And it was important to my self-esteem, I think, to improve my skills at something. I'd only ever been like a stay-at-home mom, and I worked in a preschool, but I didn't really have much confidence about any of that stuff until I was able to find a job that I really liked.
That's great. And Cara, how about you?
So I was on disability for a long time, and I actually still am. And excuse me, I have a puppy whining here. Now I work part-time, and I also own a business. I'm working towards getting off disability. And what I can tell you from living on benefits for a long time is it means always being stuck in and trapped in fear, in poverty, really, and not having many options, of always being afraid of oh crap, excuse me, I shouldn't say that. Of like always being afraid of, oh no, am I going to lose my benefits? How am I going to pay my bills? Am I going to be able to buy food this month or not? And am I going to be able to get my medications? And so working is not just about, it's about those things and having more control in that, but it's also about just the social thing of, you go to a party, somebody says, hey, so what do? And you say, oh, I'm on disability. That lands like a lead balloon. And people just kind of go, I don't know what to do with that. And it cuts you off from a lot of things. So there's a lot of reasons why working is important to me.
Yeah, thank you. You know, when we talk about barriers to employment, often discrimination comes up, and sometimes that's overt discrimination, and sometimes it's based on biases that others hold. And Laura, you started out a conversation about that just a minute ago, about what you were experiencing as you started and working through the your work experience. What do you think about that? What are other experiences that you've had around discrimination when it comes to employment?
This is Laura. I noticed, I have 3 degrees. I've earned 3 degrees. And each time that I apply for a job, hearing people typically, maybe they get between 10 to 15 jobs, or they apply for 10 to 15 jobs, but I've had much more than that. I've done so much work. But I'm barely offered the positions because I'm deaf. So for me, I really have to chase down my goals and my vision for my life. So that's why I went towards ultrasound tech, because I felt like I was being turned down by jobs. But then that's why over time I shifted over to supporting the deaf and deafblind communities so that they could have those opportunities for employment that I want the entire community to have.
Yeah. When we were, go ahead.
Just want to add one other thing. I don't want anyone to think that everyone is going to have the same experience. I want to get rid of that negative frustration, that negative stigma. It is amazing. Many people, how can I say this? Society puts labels on deafness as an impairment. But we need to get rid of that stigma, and people ask me, oh, wow, you speak so well. And then others don't. You have a job, but why don't other people have jobs who are deaf? You have hearing aids, but other people who are deaf don't have hearing aids. But everybody just wants to be treated equally.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Others have experience around discrimination?
Well, when I was a teenager, after I did the Head Start job, I wrote to the institution that I went to as a child. From the time I was 3 to the time I was 7, I was institutionalized. And I wrote to them and asked if they had any summer positions for young adults, because I maybe could provide some peer support to some of the kids with disabilities there. And I got a letter back from them saying, basically saying, we don't hire the handicapped. So that was probably my doorway into disability rights work. But I saw so many people dealing with both sort of legal discrimination or, things relating to civil rights, but also stigma, just people assuming, as Laura said, assuming people with disabilities couldn't do work, just assuming it was impossible. So I think really trying to counter false assumptions, as well as to transform the social assumptions around disability in law and practice.
Yeah. Yeah. Other thoughts on discrimination? Briefly that I love what you're saying, Laura and Deborah. I think that my personal experiences were very similar in terms of, living in a group home and then finding employment as a teacher at a preschool, local preschool. And I had been working there for some time until I needed to take a break, and I took a few days off, and the folks who ran the preschool found out that I lived in a group home and found out my diagnosis, and I was fired. And that was what led my case manager to help me figure out how to go on Social Security benefits. And so the discrimination was bad enough, but then that led to another barrier around you can't work and all of that stuff that comes up for people. And so the more barriers we put up, it's just awful for people as they are trying and want to work and be out in the community. I wonder, Cara, you know, you and I have had conversations, and I love that puppy is right in the screen right now. But there's a huge amount of barriers that our systems include around benefits and returning to work. And you just told us that you're still on benefits and you're also working. And I wonder, you know, if you want to share some insight into that whole system for folks.
Sure. It's a challenge. I mean, returning to work, even part-time, the system is really set up to be punitive, honestly. If you're not familiar with how it works, basically there's a level that's called the SGA, or substantial gainful activity level. And you can continue to earn, you can continue to receive Social Security benefits as long as you stay below that level in a month. And then if you go one, you know, even $1 over that, you suddenly lose your benefits. And so what that looks like is you might be, you know, the SGA level is not enough to live on, nowhere near enough to live on. So you might be getting like $1,000 in SSDI, and then the SGA, I think this year, I forget, is like maybe $1,100, somewhere in that area. So then if you go $1 over, suddenly you're living on half of what you were living on, basically. And I don't know anybody who can suddenly cut their bills in half like that. And it also, hi, this is close to the end of the day and she's being demanding here. She wants to be off the computer. So it makes it really hard. And especially with people who have chronic health issues, chronic illnesses like I do, you can't just go from maybe working 15 hours a week to 40 hours a week. And you may not ever be able to work 40 hours a week. And because of how the system is set up, it sees disability as a black and white thing. Either you are disabled, or if you go over that SGA, they suddenly say that, oh, you're not disabled anymore. And it's like, that's not how disability works. It's just not. And if it was set up so that it was like a graduated payment, so that you could earn more than the SGA, and then that your benefits would be reduced so you can maintain that level, and it's not just like this sharp ledge cut off, more people would try. But so many people are afraid of potentially losing benefits, you know, by accident, which can happen, that they don't even try. Yeah. And so it cuts off not just people's opportunity and potential for, you know, self-esteem and self-value and improved life and improved circumstances, but it also shuts down their potential productivity and what they can give to the world too. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I wonder other thoughts on the whole connecting benefits of employment to disability, and that whole, you know, I think about it often, like what would our world look like if we didn't have to have people saying I can't to get a benefit, have something that they can access, but also be trying to find the supports that they need and figure out employment. I wonder what other thoughts folks have on that.
I think for me, most of the barriers around all of that has been attitudinal. Like the folks who worked that I've ever dealt with in Social Security aren't people with disabilities and have distinct biases against folks. Like they're looking for you to trip yourself up, like you're lying about what you need or don't need, and that kind of thing. And I mean, I wish they understood that, like the internalized ableism you already have is bad enough without, you know, feeling like you have to, am I acting disabled enough today for them to kind of really listen to me? Or do I have to go into a whole sob story and retell my story over and over again to these different folks? So don't even have any privacy with any of that. Like I didn't disclose my disability until I was almost all the way through school and got offered a job. It was just too risky.
Yeah. Go ahead, Laura.
This is Laura. I've never been on Social Security, but I've worked with many deaf individuals and different agencies that use Social Security. It's a security net. People are comfortable with that and they don't want to let go of their Social Security, and they don't want to make those changes because they are concerned, because in the back of their head they feel, well, if they have a new job, they're really afraid that they're going to be fired, and then if they're fired they won't have the ability to have their Social Security, and then they'll have to chase down new job opportunities. So having a Social Security gives them some level of stabilization. But job, if they have an employment and a job, there's lots of questions that might not last forever.
Yeah. Deborah, I was, you've been in disability rights for a very long time, and you've helped lead some of the policy work around disability rights. And I'm wondering about how you've seen changes over those years, from the example that you gave around trying to seek employment from this organization, and then up until your career has gone. Like, where have you seen opportunities around disability over those years?
Well, I think that, of course, when I moved to Vermont, or moved back to Vermont. I was born in Vermont and grew up in New Hampshire, and then moved back to Vermont. And having had that experience with the institutions saying they don't hire the handicapped, one of the first, I was maybe the first person with a disability who joined the Vermont Coalition for Disability Rights to do legislative advocacy for disability policy change. There were a lot of parents doing advocacy, and I really felt like people with disabilities had to be part of shaping the future and transforming how disability is responded to in public policy and in society. And so that's really evolved, and VCDR is still there and doing great things. And it's because we have the combined voices and experiences of very diverse individuals and families. But I remember one of the first bills I worked on when I testified, in addition to testifying for low-income single-head households and just low-income families from my own personal experience as somebody who was a single mom with a son. But the first civil rights bill that I worked on was extending Vermont's employment non-discrimination law to cover people with disabilities, because there was no protection from discrimination. That's what allowed somebody to say we don't hire the handicapped, because there was no civil rights protection. So Vermont was actually one of the early states to create disability rights legislation before the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act. And we had to advocate for things that many of us didn't even realize we had to advocate for them until somebody told us a story and we realized, whoops, there's no civil rights protection. And so in addition to employment protection, there was the whole issue of public accommodations. And when a young man told us that he was turned away from a hotel, not because he needed accessibility features, but because he was a person with a disability and they didn't want a person with a disability in the hotel, then we realized that in addition to employment rights protection, we had to have public accommodations protection. And we had to have different things were developed to deal with public access and transforming the way, more accessibility in buildings, and advocating for public transportation opportunities and accessibility. And we did a lot of work, and we were fortunate to be able to work with vocational rehabilitation and different state agencies and around improving the Social Security work opportunities in policy, even though they're still, as Cara said, they're still miserable, but they were even more miserable in the early 1980s when I had to go through the process to go off benefits. And so, I mean, I think that one is just the realization that that our lack of civil rights protection was sort of invisible, and people didn't realize it until they or their family members experienced it, and that only by coming together could we make significant change. And also, when I first worked at the Vermont Center for Independent Living and with some other disability organizations, there were very few benefits like attendant care and personal care and other kinds of supports that people might need to be able to go to work. Some of the benefits that were available in this country, if you went to work, you would lose them. So somebody who might need personal care and could get it through Medicaid in California went to work and then was told she was no longer eligible for her attendant care. And she committed suicide because she couldn't see if she wasn't allowed to create a life for herself and use her skills and go and do the work as other people do, she didn't want to live. So Vermont disability advocates really fought for something like called the participant-directed attendant care program. But I think that we just need to do a lot more of that. It's, I was thinking before this conversation, I was remembering I was born in 1952, and my mother, two stories that I've heard. My mother told me the story of how during World War II, women would go to work because the men were overseas fighting. And so women were needed to be in the workforce. And so many companies and businesses offered childcare. That was just an automatic thing because they wanted that workforce. And then as soon as the war was over, they stopped providing childcare. And now we're still struggling to get adequate childcare resources for parents. And in a related story, after President Roosevelt died, because he had a physical disability, they had put up all kinds of ramps and accessible pathways to get into the buildings in Washington, D.C. And I vividly remember sitting at my desk at the Vermont Center for Independent Living, looking at the black and white cover picture of the National Transportation Association's magazine. And it was people tearing out all the ramps they'd put in, because now that the president didn't need them, we didn't need to have ramps in Washington, D.C. Well, speaking as somebody who's wheeled and walked around Washington, D.C., I think we need a lot more ramps, and we've had to struggle to get them back in. So I don't know if those are some examples.
Thank you so much, Deborah. It's so important to hear about some of that. And it speaking of accommodations and, design and that sort of thing, when I think of employment, I think a lot of people have been able to really stay in the workforce because of reasonable accommodations. I wonder, Winnie, do you have any thoughts around accommodations and what that looks like?
Yeah, I think accommodations have become more important for me to think about as far as how do you universally design a workspace so that everyone feels welcome, not just that you can physically access it, that you feel valued at your job, that people want you there bad enough that it's okay that you have to take a day off to go to the doctor's office. So, the letter of the law is, reasonable, meaning if someone goes through the trouble of telling their whole story to HR, gets a piece of paper that says they can have it. You could have a boss that's either like, yeah, what else can we do? Or they could be like, take it as this kind of personal affront and like, oh, we have to do this thing. I work at UVM as a lecturer, and I've heard from students over and over again that their experience in school with a disability can go up or down depending on that teacher that they have. If they have a professor who has absolutely no patience for any of that, they can just say no, make it hard for them to even stay in the class. So that's kind of where I come from with that. It's more, it's how hard is it to say it's okay to turn your paper in late because you have to go to the doctor or whatever,
Great, yeah. Other thoughts on accommodations and okay. Laura, go ahead.
perfect group to think about, perfect population, are those with hearing loss. They often aren't begging for accommodation. Like they are asking them. People are thinking or don't realize that that's a hard thing that they're trying to ask for. People will think ADA is employment only, but that also applies to other areas, not just employment. Even now, during COVID, I feel like I am fighting more. I have to explain more in depth. Okay, no, I need you to buy a clear mask so that I can lip read. You need to give me X, Y, or Z. And it sounds like I'm demanding, but I'm asking for reasonable, I'm asking for equal accommodation and equal access.
Yeah, that's great. Go ahead, Deborah.
I think that one of the things that people often don't realize around disability rights and other civil rights legislation is it isn't intended to give you advantage over and above what other people have. It's to give you equal benefit and to equalize opportunities. So it's really whether it's being able to participate in the arts, programming in your community, or go to work, or access public transportation, or just a broad range of things. It isn't intended to give somebody with a disability more opportunities than anybody else. It's literally intended to create equal opportunity. And often people treat you as if you're asking for you're gaming the system. You're trying to take advantage of people to get something that is more than what other people get, when really it's only intended to give people with disabilities equal benefit, whether it's somebody who's blind or deaf, or has physical sensory disabilities, or mental health or intellectual disabilities. It's really so important that we begin to tell more of the stories that explain that that's all that is. It's creating a level opportunity for people.
Yeah. And I think that there's been study after study that shows that when folks with disabilities ask for an accommodation, that the cost of that to the employer is very low for the most part. Like, I think we just recently released a report called Working with Disability. And again, it showed that most of the accommodations are little or no cost accommodations, asking for a specific work schedule, or maybe now with COVID, a lot more employers are looking to remote work policies and being able to have people work from home, and also how that can benefit disabled workers. And so I think that businesses are starting to explore some of those things and how they can be really impactful. That, the report that we released was really important because there's not a lot of data out there, a lot of information around people with disabilities and employment. And there was a couple other data points that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. One is that between 2010 and 2030, Vermont's projected to lose about 25,000 workers. And at the same time, we found that there's about 17,000 disabled workers available that could be going into jobs if accommodations are met, or if they're able to move through some of the benefit cliff issues and things like that. So there's lots of different variables in that, but I wonder about your thoughts on these numbers. Cara, go ahead.
It's interesting because I feel very lucky to work at BCIL in a place that understands disability and and I don't have to hide it. The job that I worked at before I came to BCIL, actually, their entire population that they worked with was basically folks with disabilities, and it was very interesting that, and I'm getting brain fog now, and I can't quite remember what you were asking, Sarah, but like, I remember that they had a lot of open positions for people doing community support with folks with developmental and intellectual disabilities. I mean, they were hurting for staff. And I was involved in the Employee Disability Network, and I advocated for, you guys are saying that there's, you know, the really low unemployment rate and everything. Well, guess what? There's a whole group of people where the unemployment rate is very high. And they're people who kind of, through the nature of their own lives, understand what are, you know, what the clients that this organization works with are going through. And there was a ton of resistance, which I just found really puzzling, that like, you have a ready-made workforce here, and you're making assumptions about what people can do and what they can't do, and about what it's going to cost you and how hard it's going to be. And it made it very difficult. And because a lot of part-time jobs that people can do while they're on disability are kind of bottom of the ladder jobs. People are often, I mean, I worked for years before I ever disclosed that I had a disability, and it made it really, really hard. And I only disclosed that I had a disability when I had to start using a cane, so I couldn't hide it anymore. And if being able to disclose that was safer and it was more welcoming, and people started to see that disability is actually, it can be a huge benefit to an employer, it would change the situation for so many people. And the number of coworkers that I had in that job that had health issues, disabilities, and wouldn't disclose it, and they actively hid it, was just astonishing. But they would disclose it to me because they knew that I had stuff going on. So I think if people could like take advantage of, in a good way, you know, the incredible pool of experience and empathy and skills and passion for work and wanting to change our lives, that would be great. And I apologize for her. She's not usually like this. She just really wants me to get off and play with her.
That's great.
Sorry.
Totally fine. So. Yeah, thank you, Cara. You know, the other thing we learned is that, you know, folks with disabilities and deaf Vermonters are working in all different industries at all different pay rates, part-time and full-time. And yet, even knowing all that, the rate of pay for women with disabilities and deaf Vermonters was lower. And then nationally, if you're also a woman of color and have a disability, that you're being paid the lowest. And so, you know, any reactions to that? Deborah, go ahead.
I think that that just compounds the other social realities that women with disabilities live with. And one thing is, I just read a study that was done in 2020, and it was an international study, but it basically found that the additional cost, out-of-pocket cost for people living with disabilities, both women and men, are very significant. In fact, if I'm remembering the statistic, it's like 28%. You need 28% more of your income in order to be able to cover the out-of-pocket disability-related expenses. Now, usually they said it ranges between $1,000 and $6,000 of extra cost, and that's more or less. Some people have significantly more. This is sort of on average. But when you think that you're living already, that your employment pay is expected to be some of the lowest pay possible, and then in addition, you have out-of-pocket cost. And then if you have other family-related issues or concerns, I had to, you know, federally, when you go to work, it's your responsibility as the individual who's going to work to pay for your cost of your transportation. And so my employers have been great about paying for my driver costs, because I have a vision disability and hearing loss as well as a physical disability. And they've been great once I get to work, but it's my responsibility to get to work. Now that I'm retired, so I don't have to worry about this anymore. But it was my responsibility to pay for a driver, and that's an out-of-pocket cost. So, and particularly for people, if you live on a modest income, it's a tough cost to come up with. And then I used to have to pay for the lift on my shoe because Medicaid didn't pay for lifts, even though it was medically recommended that I have a lift on my shoe. If you have a wheelchair, if you need a wheelchair that you can use outside the home, most public and private insurance does not cover some of the better chairs for outdoors because they only pay for indoor wheelchairs. So those are the kind of examples of out-of-pocket costs. Hearing aids, so I think that the invisible reality, people think that there's a lot of disability programs and services, and they don't realize that many people with disabilities are underinsured. And some people are not eligible for benefits at all and yet have significant health or disability related issues they're dealing with. So that low rate of pay just adds to a challenge, and also becomes a challenge when you get into retirement age and your Social Security checks lower because your pay was lower. So that's something that a lot of people struggle with.
Thank you. Laura, go ahead.
This is Laura. The one you were mentioning about the unequivalent pay with those who have disabilities. I met many individuals throughout the years who have degrees, masters, PhDs, and they're still in that same level of job. There is no advancement. They've been working with the same job for 30 years, but it seems the company doesn't value their skills as an employer or as a worker. So I've seen that happen many times, that disparity.
Yeah. Cara, go ahead.
I just want to tag on to what Deborah was saying about the cost of living with a disability. There's a whole hashtag on Twitter called the hidden cost of disability. And it's things like, just to use like an example I'm dealing with right now, I just moved to a new place. Able-bodied people in my building can park in the free parking lot. But because there is only one accessible parking space and they're not assigned, I have no way of knowing that I'll actually be able to park and get into my building. So I have to pay $50 a month to know that I can park somewhere and actually get into my building. Able-bodied people don't have to pay that. And because of idiosyncrasies in the law, as far as I've been able to find out from ADA projects and technical assistance and everything, it's legal. And that's $50 a month when I'm already low income. That's a lot. And that doesn't even count all kinds of other things like service dog and training, which let me tell you is a very expensive thing. It takes about $40,000 to train a service dog. So yeah.
Wow. Thanks, Cara. The other thing that we found in this report that we did was around the benefit of one person with a disability working in a household. A lot of times people, we talked about, Deborah I think brought up childcare earlier. A lot of people don't think of us people with disabilities as having kids, right? Like I have 3 kids raising solo at this point in my life, and the report showed that if the 43,895 people with disabilities were working, another 42,267 people in households in Vermont would benefit from that. And that can include spouse, children, parents that you might be caring for. And I wonder any responses that you have to that data. Winnie, go ahead.
Yeah, I immediately, when I saw that statistic, I immediately thought of my unique situation in that I was one of those folks with an advanced degree, but I couldn't do much with it until I found the field that I fit because of my life experience. But then also what went along with that was that I have more education than my husband, and he had been the sole wage earner. So when I went to school and could get a job, now he can be home with our kids. We have a few that have disabilities at homeschool, and he's really good at that. So he can do the thing he's good at, and I can work and do good at the thing I do, But we're not, I don't think on the whole society thinks about families that way, or people in general.
Yeah. Deborah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was very struck by this statistic, and I've seen other versions of it in earlier years. But one of the things it reminds us is that people with disabilities are part of families, and as you said, Sarah, people don't always remember that people with disabilities have children, but also young children with disabilities have parents and siblings and grandparents and aunts and uncles. I mean, disability is a personal experience, a very deeply personal experience. It's a social experience. It's also a family experience. And I know sometimes that has economic implications because people have chosen to, a spouse will provide personal care for their, or parents will provide personal care for their children. And that means that they can't be out and earning the same income that they might have earned if they weren't providing that support to a family member. The family member may be going out to work as a result of their help, but it has an overall economic impact on the family. And certainly, again, if your family income is artificially affected by the fact that people with disabilities, women and men, but particularly women, get paid so poorly, that affects your children. It affects whoever's living in your household. I just remember two parents that I met when I first began disability rights work who basically said disability is a family experience. I didn't really understand it, but when my child is discriminated against or is not able to get into a building or participate in an activity, that means the family can't participate either. And so in addition to looking at the economic issues, it's a reminder, which people are much more aware of than they used to be if they have lived family experience. But it's still something that people don't think of. I remember when I went to visit some architects who are architectural students who were learning about universal design, and one of them got interested because they saw a mother outside a playground that she couldn't get into watching her child play. And she really would have loved to have been in that playground with her children, and she couldn't do it. So it's both an economic issue, but it's also a social issue, that the discrimination filters through to a broad network of those 42,267 people, in addition to the 43,895 people with disabilities.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, it means that there's a huge number of people who are concerned about voting on disability issues who may not have a disability, but know how important it is that disability rights and resources are available.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. I think I have one final question for all of you. If you were to think of all of your life experience, and I'm so appreciative of you all sharing your life experiences. I know as people with disabilities, we're often asked to, either share or be on panels. And sometimes, it touches chords, and it takes a lot of grit to be able to share some things that are really hard to share sometimes. And you don't necessarily see it when you're on the panel, but you might be have some reflections on that tonight, or you might have already had that. So I just want to thank you wholeheartedly for taking the time and sharing this with us today. If you were to think of, there's a woman out there watching this panel who has a disability, and they might be, first, experience, or, trying to connect on some level with employment, with equal pay. What advice would you have for them based on the experiences that you have? What's one thing that you can share with them from your experiences that you think might be able to help them today? It's a heavy question, so I'll let you, I'm not going to call anyone out. Laura, go ahead.
This is Laura. I think it's really important for them to know how to self-advocate, to know their rights, to be reasonable, that they can't expect the company to break the bank, so to say, to assume that the company has plenty of money for those reasonable accommodations, that's important to be creative, to negotiate. That would be the advice that I would give.
Thanks, Laura. Other advice? Cara, go ahead.
I'm just thinking back to the first number of years where I started working again and was doing the community support in our area for folks with developmental and intellectual disabilities, and not being out as disabled. And it not just affected me, I mean, it affected me in a huge way and caused injuries, et cetera, because I was pushing myself too hard. But it also made my job performance not look so great, because I was trying to go, oh God, this person wants to go for a 2-mile walk. I can't walk 2 miles. How do I get this person to not walk 2 miles? You know, that doesn't look very good. And what I found is when I owned it and was upfront with it and like, yep, here's the things I can't do. And here's why I'm still like a real, and I can't think of the right word, a benefit to your organization. Here's how my experience as a person with a disability benefits you. That's when I started to feel better, because I'll be really honest, living on benefits can be really demoralizing, especially when you have to prove over and over and over again how poor and pathetic and tragic and horrible your life is, just to be able to keep benefits in order to survive. You know, that to feel that ownership and to feel empowered is powerful, and it's necessary. So I would say, and it's not an easy thing to do, but for me it was the right choice to own it and to find a way to talk about it in a way that helped me shift other people's perceptions of it.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Cara. Other advice? Deborah, go ahead.
I had to think about this for a while, but I think one thing is to find voices of other people with diverse disability experiences. When I was growing up, I had no contact with, nobody ever talked about disability rights or an independent living movement or social justice movement or self-advocacy. There were no parent supports. And my birth was very traumatic to my parents, particularly my mother. So and most of the literature out there about disability was that it was a tragic thing, you know, and really the children's books I saw, you were either going to die or you were just going to be a poor child who would be pitied by other people. And so, and yet I found so much literature of people who were, even if they didn't talk about it as disability, that what they were dealing with was either a temporary illness was so significant that it changed their life, even if they recovered, or they were dealing with disability related issues. And I ended up meeting through those connections of literature and art, people from diverse racial and ethnic and social backgrounds who were dealing with disability, and that helped me. But look for the people now. So there's so many wonderful peer organizations and peer support organizations, whether it's mental health or sensory disabilities or physical disabilities or intellectual disabilities, because you're still going to get those negative messages, and you need one to hear your own voice and trust yourself. If there's something that you want to do in your life, find the people who are going to help you find your own way by listening to you and respecting your own knowledge of living in your body and being the person you are, so that you're able to, you know, create a life you can celebrate. So that I would say, and it's I've met so many amazing people because of the disability rights networks we have in Vermont. Don't feel like you have to do it alone. Look for, you can be real independent and feisty about it, but look for some company along the way.
Thanks. Nice. Cara, go ahead.
I just wanted to tag on to that. I wholeheartedly agree, but also for another reason. A lot of times I think you know, in the problem is identified as being in us. Oh, gee, it's too bad you can't do that thing because you can't walk. Instead of, oh, gee, it really sucks that we set this up in a way that makes it not possible for you to participate. So connecting with other people, compare notes, because a lot of times we feel like, oh God, it's just me. It's a me thing. It's I can't do something. But when you compare notes with other people, you may start to realize more likely than not, no, it's not you, it's a systemic issue. And when you pull together, then you can work for change. And then it becomes not just your problem, it's a society problem, which it always was to begin with, but yeah.
Yeah. Winnie, go ahead.
I think one piece of advice I'd give, which I have to remind myself of every day, is that, you know, work in and of itself is awesome, but you still have to take care of yourself. So physical well-being, your mental well-being, having peers that understand you, you know, just taking time to be with yourself, because I think, like Cara was saying, it's easy to kind of push yourself past what's actually healthy for you just because you want to belong. We're really, you know, they're lucky to have you. That's the, you know, you have to think the opposite way.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all for that. That was so helpful and wonderful to hear. I think we're about to end, and I'm going to ask, Deborah is a beautiful artist and poet, and I'm going to ask Deborah to end us with a poem that she's written.
Thank you. This is from my early days in disability rights. I was actually working at the Vermont Center for Independent Living, and the poem will mention an hourly rate of $7.50, which was for people who worked at places like Burger King. And at that time, people who did attendant care or personal care earned a few dollars less than that. So that's what this poem is about. Looking for breakthroughs. March and you begin to see the bare side of hills surrounded by snow. The snow is old, crusted, only one storm in 2 weeks, and for the rest, this large stillness, broken only by the wind's occasional calling. Nothing is still at work. We are trying to cut through the paperwork and the uneasiness we have with the numerous tasks and with our itchy, unending intent to change the universe. I come home to watch March come in and think of my friend sitting in his wheelchair, unable to get to bed for lack of a spare pair of hands. The hands he needs are displayed on the glossy pages of magazines, sporting manicures and a variety of merchandise of all sizes and colors. They're the hands of an athlete reaching for the basketball, and the hands of workers paid $7.50 in benefits for flipping burgers and stuffing pockets of fries into waxed paper bags. Any one of these pairs of hands would be a way into bed for one friend without attendant care. I set up my son's soldiers to march into the magazines and across the stadiums of my TV, into the Medicaid office, into the legislature, into the governor's living room, to lay down arms and ask for hands.
Thanks, Deborah. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I adore all of you. I thank you so much for doing this work today and the work that you do every day. And thank you.